I don't know how to start this story because it's hard to believe. But this is the truth, and I will tell you every detail without leaving anything out. I, a pilot, died. Yes, I died, but then a miracle happened.
In that moment, I saw things that no one could ever imagine. The future, strange creatures, and scenes beyond human comprehension. But what I can't forget are the words I heard, "I won't make you scared." And from then on, my life was never the same. The entire world seemed to change in my eyes. The events I witnessed, the messages I received, were not fiction or rumors. Can you believe it? That's the question I want you to think about as you read these words. Please share your thoughts in the comments because the story I'm about to tell you will change the way you view life, death, and everything beyond our understanding. Don't miss it. Let me guide you on a mysterious journey. It was 1982, and I was deep in the heart of the Pacific, soaring above the azure waters of Hawaii during the RIMPAC military exercise. The sun was high, beating down on the endless ocean below, and my mind was focused on the mission ahead, a long-range patrol that seemed like just another routine task. At least that's what I thought when we took off that morning, surrounded by the hum of engines and the smooth glide of the aircraft cutting through the air. But fate had other plans. What was supposed to be just another day in the life of a pilot quickly turned into a battle for survival, one I never could have predicted. As we flew on course, the first sign that something was wrong came in the form of a subtle vibration. At first, it was barely noticeable, a mild tremor that I could almost dismiss as part of the routine operations of a military aircraft. But then it started to escalate, growing more pronounced with each passing minute. My training kicked in. I instinctively started to run through the checks, diagnosing the problem in my mind, but nothing seemed to add up. The warning lights flickered, then steadied. A surge of panic coursed through me. I was still flying, still in control, or so I thought. It wasn't until I heard the unmistakable sound of an engine sputtering, a horrible noise that filled the cockpit and sent a cold shiver down my spine, that I realized the full extent of what was happening. One of the engines was failing, I was losing power, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. The weight of the situation hit me like a freight train. I was thousands of feet above the ground with an aircraft I couldn't trust to make it back. I called it in, requesting an emergency landing. The response was quick, but the urgency in the radio operator's voice only confirmed what I already knew. This was bad. The descent was gradual at first, but the situation rapidly worsened as the seconds ticked by. My mind was racing, trying to think of every possible contingency, every plan I'd been taught to fall back on. But none of them seemed to matter. The controls felt heavy in my hands, as though the very plane was resisting my attempts to steer it. With every turn, every slight movement of the stick, I felt more and more disconnected, as though the aircraft was somehow on a path of its own. I could feel the weight of the malfunction bearing down on me, each second bringing us closer to an inevitable crash. The approach to the runway was nothing short of terrifying. The plane wobbled in the air, struggling to maintain any semblance of control. I was fighting it with everything I had, my focus narrowing to the blinking lights of the runway ahead. As we neared the tarmac, I could see the fire truck parked off to the side, ready for impact. They were there, waiting for us to make the emergency landing, but there was no guarantee they would be able to help in time. The landing was going to be close, too close. I held my breath as the wheels hit the runway. The aircraft bucked and swerved, an uncontrollable beast determined to take me down. My grip tightened on the controls, but I knew that, at this point, there was only so much I could do. The plane skidded off the runway, scraping along the asphalt, threatening to flip or burst into flames. The sound of metal screeching against concrete filled the cockpit, and for a moment, I thought this was it. This was the end. But then, something strange happened. As the chaos of the crash unfolded, time seemed to stretch out. It was as if everything slowed down, every second elongating into eternity. I could see it all. The fire truck racing toward us, the wheels of the plane sliding dangerously close to the truck's path. The ground beneath me skidding by in a blur. But I wasn't fully in my body. I wasn't physically present in the way I should have been. Instead, it was as though I was watching myself from above, from a vantage point outside the chaos. I could see the plane and the fire truck both hurtling toward each other, and yet there was no panic, no fear, just a sense of detachment, like I was observing someone else's life unfolding, as if I was watching a movie rather than living it. The way the fire truck swerved, narrowly avoiding the path of the plane, was something I'll never forget. It was like a dance of fate, every movement calculated and perfect, even in the midst of disaster. In that suspended moment, I realized something. I wasn't just witnessing my near-death experience. I was experiencing it from a perspective I couldn't explain, something beyond the physical realm. My mind was calm, detached, as though it had already accepted what was happening and had removed itself from the fray. It wasn't fear I felt, but something else, something that can't be easily put into words. Perhaps it was clarity, or perhaps it was the realization that I was no longer in control, that the outcome had already been determined in some strange way. When the plane finally came to a halt, the world rushed back into focus. The engines fell silent, the tires skidded to a stop, and the fire truck came to a halt just a few feet away from us. I was shaken, my hands still gripping the controls, but alive. It took me a moment to catch my breath, to come to terms with the fact that I had survived something that seemed impossible. But as the ground crew rushed to the plane, checking for any immediate damage, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had experienced something that went beyond a simple emergency landing. As I stood there on the runway, the crash's aftermath still fresh in my mind, I couldn't shake the overwhelming sense of something deeper unfolding within me. A connection to everything around me that defied understanding. And that feeling, that clarity, would stay with me long after the chaos had faded. I remember it like it was yesterday, even though in many ways it feels like I've lived a lifetime since then. After we made that emergency landing, after the roar of the engines died down and the screeching of metal on asphalt faded into silence, there was a strange, almost overwhelming sense of calm that settled over me. My body was exhausted, physically spent from the tension of those endless minutes in the cockpit, from the constant fight to maintain control of a machine that seemed determined to betray me. But it wasn't just my body that was tired. My mind, too, was overwhelmed, full of chaos, adrenaline, and confusion. But now, there was quiet. A strange, profound quiet that had taken over the space around me. It was as though time itself had slowed, allowing me to absorb every minute detail, every fragment of reality that surrounded me in the aftermath of the crash. I stepped out of the cockpit and into the open air, the warm Hawaiian breeze brushing against my skin. The heat from the plane's engines still radiated around me, but the air felt different, thicker, somehow more alive. I looked around at the broken fragments of the landing gear, the scuff marks on the tarmac, the twisted metal of the plane's underbelly, and at the crew members rushing around to assess the damage. But for the first time in my life, I didn't see just debris or chaos. I saw everything. The pieces, the parts, the details. I felt connected to it all, like I was a part of each fragment scattered across the runway. It was as if the universe had pulled back the curtain and revealed something deeper, something more profound, hidden just beneath the surface of our everyday existence. It wasn't just that I noticed the debris. I felt it. I felt the way each tiny piece of metal, each chipped fragment of plastic, every scrap of rubber and oil-streaked concrete fit together in a perfect, intricate dance. Every shard of brokenness seemed to have its place in the grand scheme of things. And for a fleeting moment, I could see it all. How the plane, the landing gear, the fire truck, even the dust and dirt on the runway were all part of this larger cosmic puzzle. There was no longer any separation between me and the debris. The chaos of the crash, the confusion, the fear, all faded into the background as I realized something that was both terrifying and beautiful at the same time. Everything, in its own way, was perfect. It was all part of a sublime order, an almost unfathomable perfection that lay hidden within the mess of life.
I wish I could explain it more clearly, but words fail me now just as they did then. After the landing, when I was standing there, feeling the weight of what had just happened, I wanted to speak to my crew, to share this strange revelation with them.
But how do you tell someone that you felt the universe's subtle perfection in a shattered piece of debris, in the scrape of metal on concrete? How do you put into words the sensation that every tiny element in the world, no matter how insignificant it may seem, is part of something much larger, much more interconnected than we could ever hope to understand? I tried to speak, tried to find the words to express what I had felt, but nothing came out the way I intended. My crew was still buzzing around, their voices drowned in the frantic hum of post-crash activity. They were concerned about the plane, about the safety of everyone involved, and while those were valid concerns, I couldn't help but feel a sense of disconnection. It was as if I had crossed some invisible line between the physical world and something else, something greater. The words I wanted to say seemed trivial in comparison to the experience I had just lived through. The profound connection I had felt to the world around me, to every small detail, was impossible to share in a simple conversation. It wasn't just the debris that I connected with. It was everything. I looked at the crew members around me, their faces tense and filled with concern, and for a brief moment, I felt as though I could see beneath their exterior. I could see the threads of life that tied us all together, the fears, the hopes, the shared humanity that connected us, no matter how different our paths had been up until that point. It was as though, in that moment of crisis, I could see into the very soul of the world itself, and it was perfect, in a way that defied explanation. The exhaustion that had once weighed heavily on me began to lift. But in its place, a different kind of tiredness took over. It wasn't physical, but emotional, mental. I felt drained in a way I couldn't explain, like the sheer weight of the experience had shifted something within me, something deep and fundamental. It wasn't just the close call with death that had affected me. It was the connection I had felt to everything around me. The beauty in the brokenness, the perfect chaos of the world that, for that brief, fleeting moment, I had been able to see in all its glory. I wanted to talk about it, to tell my crew what I had seen and felt, but I couldn't. The words didn't seem to fit. It was as though language itself was too small to encompass the vastness of what I had experienced. The otherworldly nature of it all seemed too much for ordinary conversation. What could I possibly say to make them understand what it felt like to see the world in such a deep, interconnected way, where every detail mattered and yet none of it seemed to matter at all? How could I explain the strange peace that had come over me, the sense that everything, even in its brokenness, was exactly as it should be? The days that followed were a blur. The plane was grounded for repairs, and the crew went through the motions of dealing with the aftermath. But as we moved forward, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted inside me, something irreversible. The world seemed different now, not in a way that was visible to others, but in a way that only I could perceive. I walked through the days that followed as though in a dream, observing the world around me with a new sense of awareness, a new sense of reverence. I couldn't explain it to anyone, not even to myself. I had witnessed something beyond words, something that had changed me in ways I didn't fully understand. And yet, even now, years later, I can't shake the feeling that I was given a glimpse into a truth so vast, so sublime, that it defies all explanation. And it was in that moment of silence, when everything around seemed to slow down, that I was unexpectedly drawn into a new world, where all the laws of time and reality no longer existed. That night, I was plunged into a realm I had never experienced before, a space that defied logic and reason, where the rules of time and reality no longer seemed to apply. It was as if my body, my earthly vessel, had been left behind. I couldn't quite describe it at first, this sensation of detachment. It wasn't like sleep or a dream. It was something far deeper, far more profound. I was still conscious, but I was not confined to the limits of my physical self. I had drifted, somehow, into another dimension. And it was there, in that vast, boundless space, that I first encountered it. As I focused on this light, something deep inside me began to stir, an indescribable sense of recognition, of familiarity. It wasn't just the awe of witnessing something beautiful. It was as though I had been waiting for this moment, as though I had known this light all my life, perhaps even before my life began. I felt the pull toward it, a magnetic force, and without thinking, I began to drift closer. There was a profound sense of peace, of love, emanating from it. And in that moment, I understood. This was no ordinary light. This was the light, the very source of all things, the Creator itself, a presence that transcended anything I had ever imagined. It was as if the universe itself had revealed its true face to me. I felt small, insignificant, yet at the same time, there was no fear. I felt nothing but an overwhelming sense of belonging, as if I had found my way home after a long journey. It was as though I had come from this light, had always been part of it, and was now finally returning. The light was not something to be feared. It was something to be embraced, something that understood me, loved me, and welcomed me. I wanted nothing more than to merge with it, to dissolve into its warmth and purity. The urge to unite with it was so powerful, so irresistible, that I felt my very soul reaching out, longing to become one with this boundless source of love and creation. And then it happened. I was no longer separate. It wasn't a conscious decision or a voluntary act. It was as though I had been absorbed into it, as if the light and I had always been one. The sense of separation, of individuality, faded away completely. There was no me anymore. There was just the light, the love, the peace. It was as though all the boundaries that had once defined my existence, my fears, my doubts, my struggles, were gone. I felt a joy so deep, so pure, that it was beyond anything I could have ever imagined. It was as though I had tapped into the very wellspring of existence itself, a force of unconditional love and bliss. Time became irrelevant. It no longer mattered if minutes or hours passed. I was enveloped in a feeling of eternal peace, as if I had been suspended in a moment that would never end. I didn't feel the weight of the world anymore. I didn't feel the burden of life's struggles, its pain, or its worries. All of that fell away. There was only love, vast, infinite, all-encompassing love. It was so pure, so vast, that it seemed to stretch across eternity itself. I could feel it, not just around me, but within me, deep in my very being. It was as if my entire existence had been defined by this love. And in this moment, I was finally reconnecting with it, finally remembering who I truly was. In the midst of this blissful state, I had no fear. I wasn't concerned about returning to my body or to the world I had left behind. I was not worried about what came next. I simply was. There was a deep knowing within me that all was well, that everything, no matter how chaotic or uncertain it seemed in the world I had left behind, was part of a greater, perfect design. The light was not just a source of love. It was the very essence of truth itself, revealing the underlying harmony of the universe. It was a truth that was so simple yet so profound that I could not fully comprehend it, but I could feel it in every fiber of my being. There was a sense of timelessness, of eternity. I was not bound by the fleeting nature of time. I was part of something infinite, something eternal. I felt the pulse of life, the very heartbeat of the cosmos itself, as if I were connected to everything that ever was and ever would be. The vastness of existence unfolded before me, and I felt both humbled and exalted, as if I were in the presence of something beyond words, something too magnificent to be captured by language or thought. But even as I reveled in this experience, I also felt a deep, profound understanding of its simplicity. It wasn't about grasping or holding on to something. It was about being in this moment, being part of the light, part of the love. As I merged deeper into the light, I felt a deep sense of completeness. It was as if all the pieces of me, my past, my fears, my desires, were laid out before me, and I saw them for what they truly were: fleeting, temporary, and ultimately inconsequential. What mattered now was the love I felt, the peace that surrounded me. I no longer needed to hold on to anything, to define myself by the stories and struggles I had lived. I was part of the light, part of something far larger than myself. And in that, I found my true self, not the one I had built from years of living and surviving, but the one that had always been there, waiting in the depths of my soul to be remembered. The love I felt in that moment wasn't just a feeling. It was a force that radiated from the very core of the universe. It was not just personal, it was universal. It was a love that encompassed all beings, all life, all of existence in its infinite embrace. It was a love that saw no separation, no division, no judgment. It simply was, and I was part of it. In this love, there was no room for fear, no room for pain, no room for regret. There was only peace, only joy, only a sense of absolute, perfect harmony. And while I was still immersed in that mystical feeling and connection, the following night, an inexplicable experience occurred, making me realize that the light I had once felt was not just an illusion, but a deeper message that the universe wanted to convey. That night, something inexplicable happened. Something so vivid, so undeniable, that I knew it was real. I was lying in bed, just beginning to drift off into sleep when it started. At first, I thought I was simply imagining things, a trick of the mind, a fleeting sensation. But then the light appeared. It didn't flood the room all at once. It was subtle at first, a soft glow that seemed to materialize out of nowhere. It wasn't the harsh, artificial kind of light you get from lamps or streetlights. It was something different, something that felt alive, full of warmth and energy. It wasn't like any light I'd ever seen. Not in a dream or in the waking world. It was pure, a radiance that seemed to transcend anything I could comprehend. And it filled the room with a sense of peace and calm unlike anything I had ever known. At that moment, I knew it was real. I felt it in my bones, in every part of me. This wasn't a figment of my imagination or a passing fancy. I was in the presence of something far greater, something that existed beyond the limits of this world. The light, though indescribable in words, held an energy that was both peaceful and overwhelming. It seemed to resonate with everything inside me, and for a brief moment, I felt connected to it, to the universe, to something divine. I didn't need to ask what it was. I just knew. There was no fear, no confusion, only a deep sense of awe and love. But then, as quickly as it came, it began to fade. The light softened, withdrew, like the tide pulling away from the shore. I tried to hold on to it, to grasp at it, but it slipped away, leaving only a lingering feeling of loss. I could feel the absence of it almost physically, as though I had been touched by something sacred and then left behind in its absence. The light was gone, and with it, a deep sadness washed over me. It wasn't just the loss of the experience. It was the sense that something precious had been taken away. Something I couldn't quite understand or put into words. The room felt colder, the air heavier, as if the warmth of the light had disappeared along with it, leaving me in a silence that felt both profound and aching. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The emptiness was overwhelming, and my mind was racing with questions I couldn't answer. What had just happened? What had I felt? What was that light? And why had it disappeared so suddenly, so completely? It was as though the experience had been real, undeniable, yet somehow unreachable. As much as I wanted to hold on to it, to try and understand it, I realized that I couldn't. It was gone, and all I had left were the remnants of that profound sensation. When I finally drifted into sleep, the sadness lingered. It wasn't a sorrow I had ever felt before. It wasn't a sadness from a personal loss or a specific event. It was a deep, existential sadness. The kind that comes when you realize that something beautiful, something fleeting, has slipped through your fingers. I woke up the next morning still feeling it. That subtle ache in my chest, as if something had shifted inside me and left an emptiness behind. As I lay there, reflecting on the experience, I knew I had to share it with someone. I couldn't keep it to myself, not when it had affected me so deeply. I turned to my wife, who was still in bed beside me, her face peaceful as she slept. I didn't know how to begin, how to explain what had happened. It felt almost impossible to put into words, but I knew I had to try. Slowly, I started to tell her about the light, the warmth, the peace, the sense of connection I had felt. I explained how real it had seemed, how I knew without a doubt that it was not a dream or a figment of my imagination. And I told her how, as it faded away, I felt this profound sadness, as though I had lost something precious. She listened quietly, her eyes fixed on me, and I could see the concern in her gaze. She didn't interrupt, didn't try to explain it away. Instead, she simply let me speak, let me share the weight of what I had experienced. When I finished, there was a long silence between us, and I could tell she was processing what I had said. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but steady. "Maybe it was a sign," she said. "Maybe it was a reminder that there is more to this world than we can see, more than we can understand. And maybe it's a reminder to keep praying, to keep believing, even when we don't always understand what's happening around us." Her words struck me, and in that moment I realized something. For so long I had been focused on trying to make sense of the experience, to figure out what it meant and why it had happened. But maybe the meaning wasn't something that needed to be figured out. Maybe it was something that was meant to be felt, not understood. Maybe it was a reminder that there is power in belief, in prayer, in love, that our thoughts and prayers have a real impact on the world, on the universe itself. It wasn't about knowing everything or having all the answers. It was about trusting in the unseen forces that guide us, about believing that love and light are real, even if we can't always see them. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling that the experience had somehow changed me. It wasn't just the light or the sadness, it was the realization that there was so much more to this life than what we can see or touch. There is power in love. There is power in prayer. And when we connect with that power, even in small, quiet ways, we are part of something greater than ourselves. Our thoughts, our intentions, our prayers, they ripple out into the universe, touching things we can't even begin to comprehend. I began to reflect on how often I had underestimated the power of prayer, how often I had taken it for granted. We live in a world that often values the tangible, the measurable, the concrete. But what I had experienced that night, that connection with the light, reminded me that there is so much more beyond what we can see. The power of prayer is real, and when we send out our thoughts, our intentions into the world, they have an effect. They create ripples in the universe, shaping reality in ways we may never fully understand, but that doesn't mean they are any less powerful. I thought about how many times I had prayed, not just for myself, but for others, for the world. And though I may not have always seen the immediate results of those prayers, I knew now that they mattered. They weren't just words or fleeting thoughts. They were part of something bigger, something divine. The experience had shown me that love, prayer, and connection are not just concepts or ideas. They are living, breathing forces that shape our world, whether we realize it or not. As I shared these thoughts with my wife, we both sat quietly, contemplating the vastness of what I had experienced. It was clear that this was more than just a passing moment. It was a reminder, a call to continue to pray, to continue to believe, even in the absence of clear answers. The light I had felt may have faded, but the lessons it left behind were far more lasting. They were reminders of the power of faith, the importance of love, and the undeniable truth that there is more to this world than meets the eye. And so, I carry this with me now. This understanding that prayer, love, and intention are not just passive acts. They are powerful forces that shape the world around us. The light may have vanished that night, but its presence is still with me, guiding me, reminding me that no matter how dark the world may seem, there is always a greater light at work, always a higher force guiding us towards something more profound, more beautiful than we could ever imagine. And as I continue to live my life, I do so with a renewed sense of connection, a deeper understanding of the power of prayer, and a heart full of gratitude for the light that I know is always there, even when I can't see it. As I reflect on everything I've seen, felt, and experienced, there's one truth that stands out above all others. Unconditional love is the key to everything. It's the foundation of everything good, everything worth fighting for. But it's not just love in the sense we often hear about, the romanticized, fleeting kind. No, I'm talking about the deep, selfless love that transcends personal gain, the kind that doesn't expect anything in return. Love for others, no matter who they are or what they've done. It's the kind of love that sees beyond our differences, beyond our flaws, and chooses to see the humanity in everyone. This love, I believe, is the real power behind everything, behind kindness, behind compassion, behind the very essence of what makes us human. But it's not just about loving people, though that's certainly a huge part of it. It's about loving the world we live in. I've come to realize that taking care of this planet is just as essential as taking care of each other. We've been given this beautiful, fragile Earth, and we have a responsibility to protect it, to nurture it. Our actions have consequences, not just for ourselves, but for every living being that shares this planet with us. When we harm the Earth, we're harming ourselves. And when we choose to care for it, we're choosing to care for each other, for the future, for the generations that will come after us. Imagine a world where we all loved each other unconditionally, where every person was treated with dignity and respect, where no one was left behind. Imagine a world where we understood that our well-being is connected to the well-being of the Earth, that the health of the planet directly affects the health of our communities, our families, and ourselves. This, to me, is what heaven on earth would look like. It's not about waiting for some distant, heavenly paradise. It's about creating it here, right now, in the way we live, in the choices we make, and in the love we give. When we start with unconditional love, love for others, love for our planet, we begin to transform the world around us. It starts with small acts: kindness to a stranger, compassion for those who are suffering, the decision to make sustainable choices that protect the environment. Each action, no matter how small, ripples out and creates change. And over time, those ripples can grow into waves washing over the world, and creating a future where love, peace, and harmony are the foundation of our existence. I truly believe that if we commit to unconditional love, love for people, love for the earth, we can create a reality that reflects the very best of who we are. Heaven isn't some far-off dream. It's something we can build, one act of love at a time. And I believe that together, we can make it a reality. I can't remain silent anymore. What I've just shared with you is not by chance, but a message that I believe God has given me to send to you.
Do you feel something awakening within you, a change that you can't yet explain? That is the sign of the unconditional love and grace we are receiving. If you feel this message, don't hesitate to share it with those around you. Let the light of love spread, like a fire that illuminates the world.
Please hit like, share this video with your friends and family so we can spread love and peace together. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue receiving messages from God, deep life lessons, and prayers to help you live a fulfilled, happy life. Together, we can build a better world where love and sharing are the keys. God will bless you and those you love. Act now and don't miss this opportunity.